The history you learn in school is false. Not in the sense that the dates are wrong, the dates are probably right, but the story, the explanation of why things happened the way they did, who was responsible, what forces were in play, that story was put into your head by the very people who benefited from you believing it. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is the most carefully documented fact of human civilization, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Start with a thought experiment about money, because money is where power becomes most visible. Imagine I open a bank. You and 1,000 others trust me and deposit a combined $5 million. I promise you 1% interest. Now I need to make money, so I lend out that 5 million to a restaurant developer who promises me 10% back. My profit is 9%. Simple enough. But here is the question. How much money is in the bank right now? The logical answer is 0. I took your deposits and gave them all out. That is also what standard economics textbooks will tell you. But that is not what actually happens. What actually happens is that I still have your 5 million on my books as deposits, and I have a new 5 million loan out. So on paper, the bank now shows 10 million. I have created money from nothing. You might think there are rules against this. They are sort of. Banks must keep a fraction of deposits on hand, but the fraction is small and the money creation is real and legal. This is how Chinese banks, in less than 30 years, went from regional institutions to the largest banks in the world. They did not get rich because Chinese people deposited more money. They got rich by issuing loans and printing money into existence. This is the foundation of the modern financial system, and the person who controls the printer controls reality. Plato described this 2,500 years ago. In his allegory of the cave, prisoners are chained underground, facing a blank wall. Behind them, free people they cannot see cast shadows on that wall, using puppets and firelight. The prisoners see only the shadows. They name the shadows. They build entire belief systems around the shadows. The shadows become their reality. This is not a metaphor for ignorance in general, it is a precise description of how organized power works. Reality is a collective hallucination. What you believe about the world, about what is possible, about who is legitimate, about what counts as a reasonable question, was not constructed by you. It was constructed by a set of institutions, incentives, and stories that were designed to make you useful to someone else's project. At the base you need force, not constant force, just a credible threat of force, that is the military, the American empire specifically, which has been the dominant military power for roughly 80 years. But armies do not build banks or write university curricula. Armies hold the perimeter. Inside the perimeter, a financial order gets to operate, setting the rules of the global economy, controlling the reserve currency, managing the flow of wealth from the periphery to the center. And inside the financial order, you need legitimacy. You need people to believe the system is fair, otherwise they revolt. This is accomplished through three mechanisms: education, media, and culture. Universities are not primarily for learning to think, they are primarily for learning which thoughts are legitimate and which are not, and for giving you a credential that certifies your compliance. News organizations are not primarily for informing you, they are primarily for framing events inside a set of assumptions that you never consciously chose. Entertainment is not primarily for enjoyment, it is primarily for normalizing a set of values: individual achievement, material consumption, competition for status, that keep you focused on the game the system wants you to play. There is a deeper layer underneath education, media, and culture. Even with all three operating perfectly, you still have defection. Some countries will not play by the rules. Three mechanisms exist for this purpose. First, intelligence. Spy agencies do not primarily exist to gather information about foreign threats. They primarily exist to infiltrate foreign elites and co-opt people into the system. If you can get someone's secrets, you own them. Second, organized crime. Not the street level kind, the international financial kind, drug trafficking, money laundering, illegal arms sales. These enterprises exist not despite the financial system but within it. They create a kind of shared vulnerability that makes cooperation mandatory. Third, science, not as inquiry but as legitimization. The modern scientific establishment is structured to produce evidence that defends the status quo. Its funding flows toward questions whose answers are acceptable. It is the most important thing to understand about this system. It does not actually need to use force very often. In Plato's cave, the chains were not made of steel, they were ropes. The prisoners could have left at any time. They did not leave because they did not know they could, and because the other prisoners would have stopped them if they tried. The moment the critical mass of people decide to stop believing, the entire architecture shakes. This is why the war in Ukraine matters so much beyond Ukraine. Russia invading and holding on sends a message. The empire can be defied. And when that message gets through, other actors start acting on it. Hamas attacks Israel when it would not have dared before. African nations throw out French military presence. Countries start pricing oil in currencies other than the dollar. The system is a perception, and perceptions can change. So why does any of this matter for you personally? Because the history you were taught, the neat, organized narrative of nations and leaders and events, is the shadow on the wall. It is the story the system wants you to believe, because that story makes the system seem natural, inevitable, and permanent. The real history, the secret history, is about how power actually moves. Through finance, through information, through the control of imagination, through institutions that operate in the shadows of nation-states and democratic accountability. Learning to see this does not make you powerless, it does the opposite. When you understand how the game is actually structured, you stop playing by rules that were written against you. You start asking different questions. You start seeing different possibilities. Immanuel Kant, one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, said that reality is not something we receive. It is something we construct. Our perception shapes what we see. And the most radical act of freedom is to choose, consciously and deliberately, what to perceive. That is what this class and this project of learning is actually about. Not to give you facts, to train your imagination, to show you the cave so you can decide for yourself whether to